So let's go. What's a complex sentence? Oh, by the way, premium subscribers, I'm jumping ahead to Unit 5 for this lesson. So for the homework, this homework will be in Unit 5 in Smrt, okay? I'll put the link in the blog, don't worry. Here we go. What is a complex sentence? What is it? Okay, well, complex sentences contain one independent clause and one or more dependent clauses. Now, right now, many students are like, what? What is that? What's an independent clause? What's a dependent clause? Don't worry, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. We will explain this, okay? Look at the following sentences. These are examples of independent clauses. Now, independent clauses are also called simple sentences. Remember, independent. You guys understand this word, independent. Independent means it doesn't need help. It doesn't need help. It's complete by itself. Okay? Now, a clause, this crazy word, clause. What's a clause, guys? What's a clause? Type in the chat. Tell me, what is a clause? What does clause mean? Now, please don't say clause is a sentence. It's not a sentence. It's not a sentence. It's a part of a sentence. It's a part. Okay? Now, sometimes sentences have 2 clauses, 3 clauses, 4 clauses. But what is a clause? What is a clause? What is a clause? Let me know in the chat. I'm going to wait for you guys. Let's look at the examples. I ought to go shopping. We're going to study ought to later in today's lesson, okay? We're going to talk about the meaning of ought to later. You shouldn't have missed class yesterday. Okay, we're going to also study shouldn't have missed later in the lesson. And finally, we had better go soon. We had better go soon. So now in the chat, I'm seeing that a clause, you guys are typing this. Thank you, Zara. Thank you, Abdelaziz. The best answer is from Abdelaziz and Zara. A clause always has a subject and a verb. Now, in my sentences here, I used modal verbs and main verbs. So when I say a verb, well, sometimes it has helping verbs, right? But a sentence in English, guys, a sentence always needs a subject and a verb. Always. This is a rule in English. I know Japanese or Korean people, when they in Japanese or Korean, when they're hungry, they say hungry. Like my wife is Japanese and she says, tired. And this is not good English. It's not good English because in English we always need a subject and a verb. We always need a clause. So in English we say I'm hungry. I'm tired. In Japanese, I love you, they just say love. Love. And that, of course, in English, we must say I love you, subject, verb. And sometimes we have objects, you. So a clause, here we go. A clause is a subject and a verb. A simple sentence just is an independent clause. An independent clause means it doesn't need help. It doesn't need more information. These sentences are complete. I ought to go shopping. You shouldn't have missed class yesterday. We had better go soon. These are independent clauses. Now, like I said, these sentences are complete. They have a complete idea. Now, let's look at dependent clauses. What's a dependent clause? We talked about independent. Independent means they don't need help. They're complete. They're good. But dependent clauses, here are some examples of dependent clauses. Because I need some new clothes for work. even though you weren't feeling well. If we want to catch the bus. These are dependent clauses. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, before I tell you the meaning, you guys can see that dependent clauses always start with special words like because, or even though, or if. Here are some more, right? When, as soon as, after, as, though, since. So dependent clauses always start with these words. They always start with these words. That is how you know if a clause is dependent or independent. Dependent clauses always start with these words, although. Okay. Here we go. What is a dependent clause? A dependent clause is a group of words. Now it has a subject, it has a verb, but it doesn't make complete sense by itself. It doesn't make sense by itself. It's incomplete, right? Look, go back here. These sentences don't make sense by themselves. If I say, hey guys, if we want to catch the bus, am I finished? Or, hey guys, because I need some new clothes for work, am I finished? Is my sentence finished? No. I only gave you half of my sentence. You're late, Saul. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. We start on the hour. It's okay. Okay. Though is like even though or although, Swati. So let's continue. Dependent clauses are not complete. They're not complete. So what do? We put dependent clauses together with an independent clause. No, French Leo, a verb alone is not an independent clause. You need a subject. You need a subject and a verb. Okay? All right. Well, that's because the imperative form has a subject. It has you. Okay? That's a good point, French Leo, but the imperative actually has a subject. Okay? When I say, shut up, the subject is you. Or if I say, be quiet, the subject is you. But you're right. We actually don't say you. You're right. Okay, let's continue. All right. So like I said, these sentences don't make sense. They're not complete. We must add an independent clause. So what do we do? Look. We're going to show you the better sentences. Now, the independent clauses are blue, and the dependent clauses are green. Look. Oh, this is a complex sentence. Okay, guys? These are complex sentences. Look, blue, this is really important, guys. Don't stop listening now. This is really important. Look, blue is independent. You must think about this. Can you stop your sentence here? Yes, you can. I ought to go shopping. What does ought to mean? It means should. I ought to go shopping. This is independent. This is a complete idea. We don't need help, but we can add a dependent clause because I need some new clothes for work. Okay? This is called a complex sentence. A complex sentence means an independent clause with one or more dependent clauses. Usually it's just one. Okay, look at the next example. You shouldn't have missed class yesterday. Ought to means should. It means should. We're going to talk about it later if we have time. Okay, it doesn't mean have to. A little bit different. You shouldn't have missed class yesterday. Is that okay? Finished? Is that okay? Yeah, That's an independent clause. It's complete. You shouldn't have missed class yesterday. But this part is not complete. Even though you weren't feeling well, I can't say that alone. I can't say that by myself. Hey, Nitesh, even though you weren't feeling well. Does that make sense? He will think, what? Even though you weren't feeling well, what? So I must add the independent clause. You shouldn't have missed class yesterday, even though you weren't feeling well. We had better go soon if we want to catch the bus. If we want to catch the bus. Okay, guys, look at the slide and tell me the order of the sentence. What's first, the independent clause and second dependent clause? Or is it dependent clause, independent clause? Okay, tell me in the chat, is it independent plus dependent or dependent plus independent? I'm going to wait for your answers. I'm going to wait for your answers. This is really, 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 really important. What's first? Is the independent clause first or is the dependent clause first in each sentence? Please look carefully. They're all the same. Okay, they're all the same. Which one's first? Independent or dependent? Right? Look at the colors. What the blue, is that independent or is that dependent? You guys let me know. Okay, I'm starting to see your answers now. Looks good, looks good, looks good. Okay. So in the chat, everybody is saying that the first part is independent. Okay? Just look at Erica, just look at the examples, okay? I'm not talking about in English, I'm talking about these examples. In these examples, the blue means independent. Okay? So here the independent clause is first. See? Independent clause first, independent clause first. And look at the next part. The next part is all dependent clauses. Now remember, dependent clauses start with these words. They start with these words. So, next question. Do you see any commas? Do you see any commas? Do you see any commas? Now, when I ask a question, I have to wait about 5 or 6 seconds so I can start seeing your answers, right? Do you guys see any commas? Yes or no? Pretty easy question, right? Do you see any commas? No. Here you go. Here are your answers, right? There are no commas. Why are there no commas? What's the rule? What's the rule? Well, the rule is if you start a complex sentence, listen. If you start a complex sentence with the independent clause, Raphael, don't worry, we're going to talk about that. If we start a complex sentence with an independent clause, we do not need commas here. Okay, look, no comma. Here, no comma. Here, no comma. Okay, don't worry, we're going to talk about had better pretty soon. Okay, yeah, I chose these examples because I want you to think about the meaning, because we're going to talk about the meaning of this later, okay? Smart teacher. Okay, so that's the rule. If you start a complex sentence with an independent clause, no comma! No comma after the independent clause. Now, you guys know, I can see Rosa's already teaching people in the chat. You can change the order. It's okay. You don't have to. Remember, that's not necessary. You don't need to. You don't have to say the independent clause first. You don't have to say this part first. You can say this part first. That's okay. That's okay. But if you start a sentence with an independent clause, a complex sentence, you don't use a comma here. No. But what happens if you start a sentence with the dependent clause? What happens if you start a sentence with a dependent clause? Well, let's skip this part. We use commas, okay? You don't have to read all this, guys, but just look. Same sentences. You see, I changed the order. I changed the order. So you see here, I started the sentence with the dependent clause, right? If you start a sentence with the dependent clause, you need a comma, everybody. You need a comma. Understand? So yeah, you can change the order, no problem. No problem. But if you start a complex sentence with a dependent clause, you must put a comma after the dependent clause. Okay? If we want to catch the bus, ching, 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 we had better go soon. We had better go soon. And that's it. Those are complex sentences. Any questions about complex sentences? Any questions about independent clauses or dependent clauses? Guys, remember, clauses. Okay, this is always a problem for students. Look, each clause has a subject and a verb. Look, subject and a verb. Subject, verb. Subject, verb, right? You need subjects, you need verbs in each clause. So a complex sentence usually has two clauses, okay? Dependent clause, independent clause. No, okay, stop asking me about this. Stop asking me about this. I'm going to talk about this very soon. Okay? It's clear, Chari? Yeah, that's pretty easy, right? It's pretty easy. Okay, so what's next? What's next? Well, everybody wants to understand these sentences, right? What does ought to mean? What does ought to? What did I say? What does ought to mean? What does ought to mean? What does had better mean? What do you guys think? If you have studied this before, what does it mean, had better? It's difficult when you write it? Well, let's just do a couple examples then. Okay. While I was waiting for the bus, I checked my email. Okay, well, it's pretty easy, Rosa. It's pretty easy. Okay. Which one? We have two clauses, right? We have subject and verb. Subject and verb. So I want to put these together. Which one is dependent? Which one is dependent? Is number one dependent or is number two dependent? Which one is dependent? Let's just do one more example, then we'll talk about the grammar, okay? Because Rosa is important. Rosa is very, very helpful student, so we need to help her. Which one is dependent, guys? Remember, dependent clauses start with those special words, right? Let's see if I can find that slide again. Right? Remember, dependent clauses where... Oh no, this is my grammar. I closed it already, sorry. But which one's dependent? Which one is dependent? Remember, dependent clauses start with those words, right? Because, as, since, as soon as, after, before, until, when, while, many, 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 right? Okay, so this one is dependent. This one is dependent. Okay, so remember the rule. If you start a sentence with a dependent clause, you need a comma. I checked my email. But if you start a sentence with the independent clause, you don't need a comma. Come on, Rosa, that's easy. That's easy. But that's a really big problem. That's a really big problem for students. Okay? So guys, remember subjects and verbs. Okay? And remember the comma rules. Okay? Let's go. Let's talk about the grammar.